two candidates. And unfortunately, well, Tom Horn bailed. However, fortunately, we do have Mark Brnovich. And yes. I will tell you, I've heard so many great reports about Mark as he's gone around the state speaking in his campaign for Attorney General. We also have another very special guest that will introduce Mark Brnovich, and that is Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery. Yes, very excited. First elected to office in special election in 2010, Bill Montgomery was re-elected in 2012. He's a West Point graduate, a decorated Gulf War veteran, former deputy county attorney, and a professional prosecutor. He has dedicated his professional and personal life to serving others. Please join me in welcoming Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery.
Thank you, and I want to thank Susan for the invitation to be here this afternoon. It's great to be back in Yavapai County, and I am here with special dispensation from the Yavapai County Attorney Sheila Pope. And it's great to get a chance to sit next to her and share lunch with a very good friend and a fellow colleague. When I received a phone call last year from a national group that typically supports Republican Attorneys General, asking me about what was going on in Arizona with our incumbent and sharing with me details about polling they had done, it became very evident that there was a serious concern about being able to retain the Attorney General's office in Republican hands. And while I may be preaching to the choir, I want to underscore something for this upcoming election cycle. While at the federal level we certainly have significant opportunities both to retain Republican control of the House of Representatives and take majority control of the Senate, we will still be left with a circumstance that there will be 2 years left on an Obama presidency. And given what we have seen over the last several years, there is no reason to expect that there would be anything but a continuing ramped up effort to transform our country with the time remaining. Therefore, it is up to states to reassert the balance of federalism that was first set forth in our Constitution when it was adopted in 1787, in which we had a weak central government with no more power than what was specifically delegated to it through the Constitution, and we had strong states that looked out for the concerns of its people and that worked on their own to resolve issues that, if they provided a novel solution that could be adapted and benefit other states, might then subsequently be adopted by the federal government. Instead of what I would argue we have today, which is where the federal government looks at state governments as nothing more than pass-through agencies for federal grants and nothing more than distant executive entities responsible for carrying out federal dictates. In order for that to be righted, we have to look at state attorneys general to stand up and defend our states, not just under the 10th Amendment, not just with a general argument about sovereignty, but with a specific argument to maintain the proper balance between the federal government and the respective 50 states. So with it becoming very evident that there was serious issues, to say the least, about the ability for our current incumbent to retain that seat, we started looking around for someone else who was expressing an interest in wanting to serve in that capacity and do the hard work that it takes to take on an incumbent in a primary and then succeed in a general election. The point that we needed to have a new candidate for our Republican Party for Attorney General was driven home one morning as I drove to work. As I was driving along I-10 into Phoenix, I saw a billboard off on the east side of the freeway. And it said, "What do Tom Horn and Jody Arias have in common?" They were both convicted the same day. One for a hit and run, the other one for murder. Now, I am not saying hit and run is the same thing as murder, but when that can show up on a mailer to thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands of homes in a general election, that underscores what the polling established. We need someone who we do not have to shy away from defending, who can run a successful campaign based upon professional qualifications, honorable service, someone who is a consistent, authentic conservative instead of someone who cherry picks issues in order to create a facade. I've seen it day in, day out in some of my workings as well, between my office and the Attorney General's office. Though I will tell you, we maintain a professional relationship to do the work that needs to be done for a shared constituency. There is so much more that needs to be done. I should not have had the lead in defending Arizona's law on the 20-week abortion case. I should not be the one who's carrying the burden in trying to establish whether or not Arizona's Medical Marijuana Act really can be implemented consistent with federal law. I should not be the one who has to continue to advise state agencies and handle cases that they bring to me that should go somewhere else. I should not be the one who has to carry the burden of leading the fight for criminal justice issues at the legislature. And I don't mind it. It certainly makes for good press and gives me an opportunity to highlight what my office can accomplish. But there's so much more I'd rather be doing in partnership with fellow county attorneys like Sheila Polk and so many others around the state. We need a strong attorney general. It makes our state better. It makes our criminal justice system better. And so I would like to introduce to you a friend, a colleague, someone who has the professional qualifications, who has prosecuted at the county, state, and federal levels, who is so conservative that he uses the absolute minimum number of vowels in his last name. My friend and our next Attorney General for the state of Arizona, Mark Brnovich.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. My wife is a working mother, and so she couldn't be here today. And when I get back to Phoenix, I'm sure she'll be a little jealous because right now I feel like I am the luckiest man in Arizona. So, in fact, I find it hard to believe Tom Horn wouldn't want to be here. So, thank you all very, very much for having me here today. Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me today. I do see a few cameras and people taping these meetings. I mean, you get used to that. I've never run for office before, but we're starting to get used to it. And I will say, though, there's no need to record this because the NSA will have copies available at the end of this presentation. Frankly, I'm not sure, and I was very disappointed that Attorney General Horn wouldn't show up here. Frankly, if he has a hard time showing up in a room answering questions from you, I wonder what's going to happen if he's our nominee when he gets asked tough questions by the Democrats and the media. And I guess we should have, County Attorney Polk should have told him that there was no need for him to bring his defense attorney today, so he could have shown up without his posse. Anyway, I really want to introduce myself, to talk a little bit about myself, why I'm running for Attorney General, and what our priorities will be once I become Attorney General. Once again, my name is Mark. I grew up here in Arizona. I attended public schools in the Phoenix area from the 1st to the 12th grade. Graduated from Arizona State University. Went to law school at the University of San Diego, and then immediately came back to Arizona to practice law. I was a deputy county attorney for 6 years, the first 6 years of my career, including working in the repeat gang bureau. I was also assistant attorney general, and as Bill mentioned, assistant United States attorney, so I prosecuted cases at all levels. But the reality is, if you want to know who I am and what makes me tick, you should probably read an article that appeared in yesterday's National Review, the National Review Online. And the article's title is A Yugoslavian Mother's Son. And I was very flattered by the article because the article talked about my campaign for Attorney General, why I'm running, and those influences that run deep into my soul. My mother was born in the former Yugoslavia. As a young child, she lived through World War II. She lived through communism and came here as a woman, a young lady. And when I was growing up, my sisters and I were taught two very, very valuable lessons throughout our entire life. One, that the United States is the greatest country in the world. We truly are this beacon of liberty and freedom, whether we recognize it or not. And to he or she who much is given, much is expected in return. And we all have an obligation to use our talents to keep that flame of liberty and freedom burning brightly. And the second lesson she taught us after living through fascism and communism was, as Barry Goldwater Sr. used to say, Any government that's big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it away. And we always need to be wary of too much government control in our lives, and too much government that impacts our personal liberty and our personal property. So, that background, it was what led me to my career choices. At servant's heart, I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure that I was giving back to my community and a country that gave so much to me and my family. And that's why I spent most of my career working with law enforcement to keep our community safe. I've literally handled hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal cases. Everything from drive-by shootings to corrupt public officials. I've never been backed down from the fight, and that's why I'm running for Attorney General. Because regardless of who our Attorney General is in Arizona, we shouldn't have to make excuses for him or her. We should have an Attorney General that gets headlines for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. When I'm the candidate in November, we will have a candidate that we want to vote for, not someone we have to vote for. And I think it's very, very important. If you look at my background, if you look at what I've done as far as being a prosecutor, I'm also very proud. There's a lot of folks here from the Goldwater Institute, some of my former colleagues. I was the first director of the Center for Constitutional Government at the Goldwater Institute. I wrote extensively about property rights. I've authored amicus briefs on property rights in cases like Kelo v. New London that were signed off by groups like the National Taxpayers Union. Because once again, the way I was brought up is our Constitution was meant to be something. And when there are provisions in our federal Constitution about the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure and other amendments dealing with the importance of property and religious liberty, those mean something to me, and I feel like it's important to defend them, and that's what I did when I was at the Goldwater Institute. The last 4 years, I was the director of the Arizona Department of Gaming. That is the agency which oversees the casino and gambling industry. It's a law enforcement agency. We had 35 sworn officers. One of the things that I learned growing up here in Arizona, there's an old Native American expression, have less thunder in your mouth and more lightning in your hands. Judge a person not by what they say, but what they do. And when you give someone your word, you stick by it. Those are what I was taught, our Arizona values. And so when I was gaming director, I chaired the Governor's Privatization Commission, and I've been a fiscal conservative, and I wanted to make sure we ran our agency in a fiscally responsible way. We did more with less. The number of employees when I began than when I left was lower. The last year we came in more than $250,000 under our budget appropriation. And all at the same time doing more with less. For the first time in the agency's history, we seized hundreds of illegal gambling devices. We worked with law enforcement to keep our community safe by shutting down illegal gambling. We reduced the size of the gaming application. Working with our tribal partners, we came up with a universal application for vendors to make it easier for people to do business in the country, but at the same time, making sure the public was protected. So I had a very, very, very great job as gaming director. And the question becomes, well, why are you running for Attorney General? Well, in Ronald Reagan's farewell address, he told us, don't be afraid to see what you see. And frankly, as a former prosecutor, and County Attorney folks here, County Attorney Bill Montgomery, anybody that's worked as a prosecutor or a police officer will tell you that you are held to a higher standard. In fact, when you see Lady Justice, she's often pictured with the scales of justice and a sword in the other hand. That sword represents the power of government, the power of the state, of a prosecutor that can take away your life, liberty, and property. It's a solemn obligation, and we need to make sure that we have folks in those positions that we trust to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. And so, as a former prosecutor, I didn't like what I was seeing in the Attorney General's office, and I was worried that we would not retain the Attorney General's office, and we'd end up with a very liberal Democrat, the second coming of Chittenden Napolitano as Attorney General. So instead of sitting around complaining, I wanted to do something about it. And I want to make sure as Attorney General, we have our priorities right. We need to make sure we do three things. One, we need to protect the most vulnerable people in our society. And whether it's the unborn or the born, whether it's children or vulnerable adults, whether it's CPS reform, the Attorney General exists to assist. He or she is the state's lawyer. They represent these agencies. Where was Tom Horn when thousands of cases of child abuse or child neglect were being disregarded and stuck in piles? I will tell you, when I'm Attorney General, We won't have to ask that question because we will do everything we can to make agencies are getting the advice they need to do the job they need to do. Second, one of the most important things the Attorney General can do is work with the county attorneys, local, federal, and state law enforcement to keep our communities safe, especially when it comes to trafficking, especially when it comes to going after the drug cartels. You know, recently the head of the Sinaloa cartel was arrested in Mexico. As a former gang prosecutor, I'm worried about that because nature pours a vacuum, and I think you're going to start seeing a spike of violence along the border. In fact, you're already seeing it. And so we need a prosecutor, we need an attorney general that can work with the county attorneys, local federal law enforcement, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to aggressively pursue the people that are engaged in smuggling. And whether that's drugs or human beings or illegal immigrants to this country, we do everything we can to use all the tools in the state toolbox to go after the smugglers. My time is brief, but one thing I think is really, really important. I like to picture Lady Justice not only holding that sword, but wielding the shield of sovereignty, protecting us against the overreach of the federal government. As Bill Montgomery alluded to, we have a Constitution, we have a 10th Amendment. Barack Obama has famously said he has a pen, and unilaterally he can rewrite laws, or Eric Holder can encourage state attorney generals to violate the law. We have a 10th Amendment, and we need to make sure we have an attorney general that's asserting that. So I worry when the current attorney general joins Eric Holder in trying to stop the merger between U.S. Airways and American Airlines. I wonder where the priority's at. This coffee mug I'm holding today is not just a coffee mug, but it's also Tom Horn and several other attorney generals told Urban Outfitters they should stop selling this mug because it sends the wrong message when it comes to prescription drugs and prescription drug use. So our attorney general has time to do that. But meanwhile, when 11 other Republican attorney generals at the end of the year are sending Secretary Sebelius and President Obama a letter urging them to stop breaking the law and the Constitution when it comes to unilaterally writing Obamacare, Tom Horn's name's out on this letter. When these attorney generals talk about the concern of our privacy rights, where's Tom Horn? When Tombstone, Arizona is fighting back against the Bureau of Land Management against the federal government, the Obama administration, to secure its water supply. Where's Tom Horn? And no disrespect to my former colleagues at the Goldwater Institute, but as Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Anybody that's lived out west for any amount of time knows how important water is to our future in the agricultural industry and other industries here in Arizona. We shouldn't leave it up to the Goldwater Institute to fight for Arizona's water supply. I could go on. There have been many other missed opportunities. Grease v. Galloway, a case dealing with religious liberty. It was argued a few months ago at the Supreme Court. Arizona was one of only a few states with Republican Attorney General that didn't participate in the brief on the merits. Today, right now, there's a case being argued, just was argued, the U.S. Supreme Court, a Hobby Lobby case dealing with religious liberties. We need an Attorney General that understands these issues, and they're going to fight for our rights to freely practice our religion and associate with those we want without government interference.